How's it going, everybody? I'm Cherryboywriter, and this is Shonen Ronin, the show all about leftist critique and the shonen aesthetic. So, you went to Food Wars Season 3 and you were absolutely amazed by the plot twist of Episode 5. Then you get to Episode 6, and you get to see the new organization established by the latest antagonist of Food Wars, Azami Nakiri, created to take over every single independent club and housing area all along with the rest of the school. If you didn't think to yourself, you probably scrolled down to the comment section of the episode, or you went to your favorite discussion thread somewhere, and to find a statement which can be generally summed up as, "Hey, wait a minute, isn't this just like Guardian Movie?" Now, if you were the type to comment that, I bet you're feeling pretty smart by getting historical references and symbolism. So sorry to say, brother, but paying attention in class to let the state-sponsored indoctrination sink in does not a historian make. But no worries, we're here to make sure you actually have historical bragging rights, as I grant you the ability to understand why Azami Nakiri is the perfect capitalist. Let's start with the basics. Definitions. Now, for those of you who actually read Karl Marx, you know that communism is a classless and stateless society. Thus, countries like the USSR, where people are getting these correlations in these seasons, aren't communist. And such countries never actually claim to be communist themselves. They are indeed socialist. Side note for those smartasses out there, this isn't a case of no true Scotsman fallacy. We're not talking about individuals here yet, brother. So, what does that mean to call someone a communist? It simply means the person wants a classless and or stateless society. Now, many communists see socialism as a necessary step on the road to communism, so as a result, words begin to be used interchangeably in common discourse over time. However, it is important to keep this distinction in mind for later in the video. Now, defining capitalist and capitalism is much cleaner since we don't have to worry about any of the unnecessary baggage that comes with communism. However, there can be some confusion about it, so we have made a playlist describing both socialism and capitalism, but to sum it up as quickly as possible, capitalism is a system whereby capital, or money, is invested into acquiring two things: the means of production and the labor, which would be the people and or machines, in order to make a product that will be sold for profit. That profit generates more capital than your initial investment. In layman's terms, bosses hire people to make the money. Profit and private ownership is the driving force of capitalism, and a capitalist is anyone who owns the means of production. Now, with those definitions in mind, it should be clear to the particular perceptive the problem of even insinuating Azami is in any way a socialist. But we like to be thorough here, so I'm going to display not only he is not a socialist, but every way he's a fantastic capitalist businessman, and even delve into why he could rise to power this season. Azami is at least partially motivated by profit, and he's utterly obsessed with dividing people into the classes of the elite and everyone else. Now, Azami literally means thistle, and Nakiri uses the kanji for to mow down and to cut. So the idea behind his character is one who cuts down those from below him, and production costs, but we'll cover that a little bit later. Contradictory as it may sound, he relies on the existence of a lower class for his self-image, not dissimilar to how ethno-nationalists need the existence of other races to fill their own hate-filled egos with illusions of superiority. This is definitely helped by the vague lines between class and race, as in both cases, if the specific object of their hatred becomes a non-issue, they can divide up the population even further along new lines. So, to give a second example, there are some debates between white nationalists about whether or not Jews can be considered white. Because race is an artificial construct, the definition of whiteness can be changed as needed to ensure that there's always an underclass. Logically speaking, the same applies to concepts like class. This is not only to ignore the real differences that these distinctions point out, but rather to draw attention of social hierarchy. To sum up, Azami can't be called a communist in the political sense because he desires the firm establishment of classes and not their elimination. Now, one might say if it walks like a Russian despot, and it looks like a Russian despot, we should probably call it a Russian despot, shouldn't we? You can define things however you like, but the fact is that this guy and Stalin are doing the exact same thing, says the contrarian. This is where we like to bring up that Azami's purge is more enclosure movement than 5-year plan. Now, for those of you who aren't huge history nerds, here's a quick rundown of both. When we refer to the 5-year plan, in this case we're talking about the centralized economic plans and the Soviet Union beginning around 1920s. When we refer to the enclosure, we more specifically mean no more communal land for peasants to use, as all land is consolidated into larger farms by law. So, with no ways to get the necessities of life, peasants begin moving to the cities and they're assigned their fate to factory labor. So, feudalism to capitalism, an easy peasy peasant squeezy to death. Now, there is this myth among the right wing, which has seeped into the wider and Western cultural mythos, of that economic planning does not lead to widespread abundance and happiness, as history would suggest, but somehow magically leads to starvation and unhappiness like capitalism actually does. The origins of the myth coming from a fabrication of the state of the Soviet Union and Communist China, mostly using the fact that they suffered from famines around this time. Now, most people have been fed this line of thought their entire lives by the school system that their parents entrusted to educate them and not make factory workers out of them, as their form and function would imply. So I can't really blame people for not taking the time to look deeper. Self-education takes both time and willingness to learn, and you're probably paid by the hour, if at all. In which case, the state of your historical knowledge might not seem the biggest of your concerns right now. While there are plenty of books, articles, and videos that address this myth, the only thing you need to know right now, the causes of the famines are unrelated to socialism. What does this all have to do with Azami, though? Let's look at what actually happens in the show and what he says about it. So, Azami creates an organization loyal to himself and who hunts down detractors. Scummy, but not particularly unique to any form of government or economic system. Then seizes the means of production in the form of clubs and the land away from the workers, in this case the chefs, and encloses them in his own hands in order to make the best food for the best class of people, for the most profit. He doesn't want chefs making their own dishes. Instead, dictates to them what and how they should make it, not for any particular resource management reason, simply because he prefers it done that way. And he rises to the power purely through the votes of a few oligarchs. He turned the Fantasy Dream Academy market into a fascist empire on no small terms, mind you. A commercial monopoly of the highest order, which seeks cultural hegemony over the food world. In short, the features that define socialism, from the workers controlling the means of production, as it was in the academy, to embracing different cultures, which aren't bourgeois, we'll get to that, which again, the prior academy made good on. Even the freedom of the workers to be connected to the product of their labor, all of these principles were stomped on by Azami. The only thing we're left to figure out is why. And in figuring that out, we'll learn how Azami is the perfect capitalist and how in many ways the rise like someone before him was inevitable. Indeed, it is time to see why great leaders don't make history, but how history and the material conditions that it shapes creates great leaders. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put on your sociologist hats as we dive into the realm of dialectical materialism. I used a very special word earlier, monopoly. It's by understanding the different types of why and how they form that we can finally explain the so-called connection between socialist dictators and Azami is coming from. When we do, you'll understand the difference in how Russia's geography shaped the need for centralization, leading to Stalin, and how the Academy's own political system laid the groundwork for Azami's dissection, much like in Hitler's Germany. Monopolies can be either capitalistic or non-profit. Notice I did not say socialistic or government-owned, because for-profit monopolies can exist in socialist countries depending on a multitude of factors, historically, which include being owned by the government for government revenue. And non-profit monopolies actually exist basically everywhere. You don't have to pay for water. Which brings me to another point. Monopolies aren't inherently good or bad. What matters is the intent behind the monopoly, i.e. whether it's financial or efficiency's sake, so-called natural or necessary monopolies, or cost efficiency's sake, which could lead to the categorization of negative externalities and the need for cultural domination / hegemony, since eventually culture becomes a product instead of having a functional purpose like a social bonding or teaching lessons, like how to avoid certain animals / food or doing things that will bring doom and destruction. It's clear that Azami set up a for-profit monopoly instead of a dictatorship of the working class many Marxist/Leninists strive for. We also know why at this point. This is how setting comes in. Much has been written and said about how liberalism eventually leads to fascism, so much so that we even made a playlist on it, but the TLDR is the contradictions of capitalism eventually necessitate extreme control and violence both in and outside the system to keep it running. How does this relate to the Academy? Well, one of the contradictions of capitalism is that it results in the concentration of more and more power in fewer and fewer hands. We see this with the establishment of the Elite 10, which is a textbook case of a literal elitism, which can be justified with the same backwards logic of meritocracy and used to try and justify inequality in real life. While in the show it's not so bad because it's fiction, so the people are really incredibly skilled, hardworking, smart, the problem remains systemic. As we saw, it only took a little more than half the oligarchy, literally one vote, to completely take away power from their fellow workers and chefs and into the hands of the fascists. Once again, art imitates life. The meta-irony of this is that had the Academy truly embraced socialism, this would have never have happened in the first place, which makes Food Wars sort of an accidental commentary. To sum up, one only needs two things in order to identify Azami's place as the pinnacle capitalist of modern shonen jump: a firm understanding of historical materialism, in other words, actually knowing history, and listening to his own words. Not only were his actions contradictory to socialist thought, but what he believes is more in line with those who would seriously and without the mere excuse of training compare him to the communist, those who would like to keep the world separate between the haves and the have-nots. Hope you liked this plate of fresh analysis. If you did, I ask that you not subscribe, and instead do us here at the Shonen Ronin a favor. In the spirit of our first video, simply use whatever social media platform you like best and describe the last time you helped someone eat with the hashtag #HopeYouLikedIt. It can be funny, serious, as simple as helping someone carry groceries, or as complex as volunteering at the soup kitchen. Starting the series has been a dream with me and my comrades for years now, and it's finally off the ground. Hopefully we can do some good with it. If you'd like to help this little birdie fly, consider supporting us on Patreon, because, you know, everybody's gotta make a living somehow, right? And you're not gonna get it under capitalism. In any case, I've been your host for today, Cherryboywriter, and as always, remember, you gotta stay woke.